The history of J_C_D dynasty. The history of J_C_D, more formally known as Underdash, is a complicated yet intriguing tale. What started out as a tribe on loyal follows, to the expansion of a global empire, and the fall of mistrust and deceit. Not much is known about this period of time, so I'll just make things up as I go along. To minimize the confusion of this web of speculation, I've broken the dynasty into 4 years. The rise and conquest, how the J_C_D dynasty began, and how its impact shaped the future. The Golden Era, an era of peace and prosperity within a stable empire. The Fall, a time of anarchy and exploitation. The division of the empire, and how warring factions formed. The Wipeout, the end of the dynasty, the end of the bloodline of the royal family.
Parte 1. The Rise and Conquest.
Before there was an empire and group of tribes known as Jan, Khan, and Don roamed nomadically across the land in the continent of B2 Cause. After some time had passed, each tribe set up along the same river, the Umbral River. The tribes did not trade and communicate. But after living separately for 400 years, the tribes were forced to join up and take arms against the Image.0 Empire. This empire had been terrorizing the 3 tribes for many years, and they knew they could not fight alone. The Image.0 Empire was a real tank, boasting a 500,000-man army and 2 elephants. The tribes could not compare to that might. Each tribe roughly had 15,000 at most and no elephants. To help fight against this empire, representatives from the 3 tribes, Momotre from John, Cotton 89 from Khan, and from Don. These two met in the common land of tribes and made a deal. They would join together and become one. With the merge success, the leaders met up to figure out a new name for the tribes. They settled on a name that would ring out for centuries to come, the infamous J_C_D. With the merger of these tribes, the army grew and morale was high. People were excited to finally take down Image.0, going as far as to try and steal the empire's 2 elephants. The rulers condemned these ignorant slurs. The J_C_D empire, as it was known, was still too weak to fight Image.0, boasting a rather small 60,000 strong army. The J_C_D empire knew it had to grow and expand, so the rulers began to conquer smaller, less powerful tribes to the south of the Image.0 empire. After 50 years of conquest, all the land around the Umbral River was either ruled by J_C_D, or Image.0. The Image.0 empire did not recognize J_C_D's rising power, and still saw them as a weak nation that could be conquered easily. In the year 1094, after 30 years of neutrality between the 2 powerful empires, something snapped. J_C_D had invaded one drive, a prominent trading port on the Umbral River. Image.0, still blind to J_C_D's power, was slow to respond, leading to the capture of one drive. Now in their enemy's territory, the empire quickly captured 3 other big cities: Digress, a popular farming town; Melody, another port city; and Mood, a big city only 50 miles from the capital. J_C_D had pushed deep into Image.0's territory, which led to the Image.0 mobilizing their army, which had grown weak. The army had lost much of its former prowess, and several battles took place, cementing the fall of the Image.0. The final battle took place only 4 years after the war began in the capital city of number equals 2. This was Image.0's final chance to make a comeback. The last remaining town folks and soldiers who had not fled helped to fortify the city for its last stand. They either held back J_C_D, or died trying. Led by Ishvi Cannon, the J_C_D took the city and finally wiped out the Image.0 empire. Ishvi was hero and elected ruler of the J_C_D empire, which had now controlled the entire continent of B2 Cause, nearly 100,000 square miles. With the continent unified under one ruler, this began the next phase of the J_C_D dynasty. Welcome to the second part of a 4-part series. In the previous episode, we discussed the beginnings of the J_C_D dynasty and the many things that happened to get them where they are today. I recommend you watch the first part before this one, as you will get a better understanding of what is going on.
Part to the Golden Era.
The defeat of the Image.0 had allowed the JCD to control the entire continent of B2 cuz all of the loyal servants and rulers of what was left of the Image.0 were rounded up and disposed of. No mercy was given, their time was up. Once the last of the Image.0 was gone, the JCD had to design a government. But I'm not gonna discuss fully how the government worked, as that would take too long and too much effort. Instead, we'll mainly be focusing on a city. What city, you may ask? Why, it's none other than OneDrive, of course. If you remember back to the first part of this series, you will know that OneDrive was an important port town. J_C_D had invaded OneDrive, a prominent trading port on the Umbral River. OneDrive had remained an important port city even after the war against the Image.0, providing access to greater trading potential overseas. OneDrive grew and grew and grew and grew and grew.
You have to be kidding. I paid good money for the videos and they just break on me. This is why don't buy cheap of brand stuff. Part to the Golden Era.
Using their newfound wealth and power, the JCD built two massive cities. One city was just Notre Dame and the other a normal big city. These cities gave them more wealth as they brought in more people, and that's more wealth. The JCD also built ships, paintings, all very important to the growth of an empire. But hey, that's all the info on the golden age of the J.C. Hello again. Welcome to the third part of the history of the JCD. In the previous episode, we discussed the golden era of the JCD. I recommend you watch the first part and second part before this one, as you'll get a better understanding of what is going on.
Part 3, The Fall.
The golden era of the JCD allowed for the empire to grow in wealth and influence. Everyone was happy and at peace. The constant technological advancements had increased the production rates of goods and jobs became more specialized. Everything was going fine until Gerard Nash, the fourth ruler of the JCD, enforced a rule that would have dangerous consequences. Gerard Nash grew up as a wealthy child during the golden age of JCD. He gained power after the previous leader died. At age 25 he was in charge of the world's most powerful empire. He was known for his zero-tolerance policy for any who still sympathized with the image. Learning from what his predecessors had done, mainly the Daybreak Massacre. The Daybreak Massacre happened early on in the Golden Era in an attempt to stop any previous Image.0 rulers from gaining power again. Watching the previous episode will clear things up if you are confused, but as the newest ruler of the JCD, in a time where there was peace and prosperity, Gerard Nash knew something was afoot. He knew the Image.0's influence was coming back as a new form that was much more violent. To combat this, Gerard portioned out a piece of the empire that was most populated with still resentful Image.0ians. He also requested anyone who still supported Image.0 to head to the area. In hindsight, this was a bad plan. It created an opportunity for the Image.0ians and their supporters to raise an army. Silently the army grew as citizens were blackmailed into joining. People began to protest to go to war in the capital city. They wanted to crush the Image.0 and wipe them out like them should 50 years ago. Their pleas fell on deaf and unwilling ears. Gerard was too busy negotiating trade deals with foreign powers to recognize the insurgents happening in his own backyard. After about 6 months of planning, something finally happened. Image.0 had declared themselves as a sovereign nation, with their flag as shown here, and demanded that the JCD recognize them as such. The JCD were unwilling to allow such a thing, and they finally immobilized their army to stop them. The loyal supporters of Image.0 attacked and ravaged surrounding town and villages. One Drive, a prominent port city on the Umbrel River, was all but burnt to the ground. Truly a travesty for the JCD. The goal of the Image.0 was to not capture the JCD's territory but to more or less tire them into a peace treaty which would allow the Image.0 to be recognized as a sovereign nation. Things took a different turn when the Image.0's army commands and Suda leader died in battle just outside of Digress, an important farming town. The Image.0 were disgusted by this and turned to a different strategy. No longer did they want a peace treaty, they wanted complete conquest. Fueled by a burning memory of what they remembered from the past, the scars ran deep and the Image.0 would not give up. All of the JCD were gone. The JCD had to keep Digress out of the hands of Image.0. If Digress fell into the hands of the Image.0, it would allow them to split the JCD into two pieces, making conquest easier. Image.0 and the JCD were at a standstill. Spilt half and half, neither could gain any land. The capital was dangerously close to the hands of the Avidez army. One wrong move by the JCD and the empire would be gone. The JCD had lost everything. Their wealth, their land, and most importantly the trust of the people. Hello again. We meet once again to discuss the J_C_D. This time we focus on the wipeout of JCD. Once again check out the previous parts to understand the full picture.
Parte 4, The Wipeout.
Through a grueling war against the JCD, the Image.0 had managed to come out on top and crush the JCD. The JCD had lost and were worried of what might come of them. Many Image.0ians wanted the complete and final destruction of the JCD and their supporters, but Ralph had other plans. Ralph was one of the main generals who fought against the JCD and rose to power after the JCD's loss. Ripple was level-headed and wanted the JCD to be treated well and allowed them to return to their homeland on the Umbral River. Ralph also requested the immediate division of the tribes. They were divided into the tribes John, Khan, and Don. Ralph grew up in the Image.0 portion of the JCD Empire and at a young age found a deep respect for them. He was in awe by how quickly the JCD had conquered an entire continent and vowed to be just like those generals. This played into his adult as he was one of the main people leading the revolution against the JCD. Even now, almost 50 years, Ralph still kept his respect for the once great empire and its people. Though Ralph's respect for the JCD was very evident, he also recognized that prominent leaders of the JCD must be wiped out. This was to ensure peace within his empire. The descendants of the original representatives who formed the JCD, Momotre from John, Cotton 789 from Khan, and Iwu were to be killed off. Ralph also had gave land the JCD stole back to its original owners. This shrunk the Image.0's power and influence. Ralph had essentially undo all the things the JCD had done. The JCD, forced to live on their ancestral land, were still angry about their defeat. Attempts were made to bring the empire back together, but there was no success. The Image.0 ensured this. After ruling for 10 years, Ralph died. His successor, his son Ivory, did not agree with his father's stance on the JCD and wanted to complete wipeout of them. He went to each tribe one by one and had the people rounded up and disposed of. Some did still live, but most were gone. It would take about a century for the population to come back, and over that time to Image.0's influence dwindled. JCD were no more. They had truly lost everything.